Good morning, everyone. We are live on the virtual stage of the Bristol Tech Festival. I'm Ben Shorrock. I am part of the Bristol Tech Festival organising committee, and we're super excited to have you here today. This is actually the first virtual event that will be happening this week. There's about 30 virtual events, so we're all prepared though. Nothing's going to go wrong. There will be no technical problems, despite this being a technical festival, which means that inevitably something goes wrong somewhere along the way. I'm really delighted that we have Annabelle and Adrian talking to us today. They have some things that they're going to take us through on some slides that look really interesting. But unfortunately, you're going to have to listen to me for a quick minute before we kick off with all the informative information. For any of you that want to comment or ask questions throughout the session, please do so. You should see on the right hand of your screen, there's a chat box. Please make sure that you chat in the stage screen area, because that means that we can see it in the backstage. If you chat in the sort of overall event area, your question won't necessarily be picked up. So we don't want anyone to miss out. But first of all, what I want to do is talk very briefly about what the Tech Festival is and why it's important. So this is the third year of the Tech Festival. First year, 2019 was great. Everything was in real life. We had a brilliant time. 2020, like everybody else, we had a few hiccups and had to do everything virtually. And in 2021, this year, we're doing a hybrid festival. So we have 53 events happening over the space of the week. Some of them in person, some of them virtually, which means there's something for everybody really, and there's lots of things that you can engage with and see. It goes without saying that although the festival is a not-for-profit festival, it really couldn't happen without the support of all of the partners that get involved. So thanks very much to all of our partners. I'm going to run through them very quickly, but a lot of our partners are not just the commercial partners, but our event partners and the volunteers who are working really hard this week. So for any event organizer that's put on an event, we're super appreciative, because people aren't here to listen to me, they're here to listen to the things that are happening with our event partners. That said, our commercial partners are also super important. So thank you so much to all of our community partners. So all of the organizations that you can see on the stage at the moment have all put in an amount of money to enable the festival to happen, and it really wouldn't have been able to happen without them. So we are super appreciative, and we hope those partners all come back next year. If you are in the market for buying software or fintech solutions or a variety of different national composite things, please do go to one of those partners and buy something and say that I've sent you, because that always makes things easier for us. And I should mention as well, of course, our headline partner, so Softcat, are our headline partner for the Tech Festival this year, and they've been really, really supportive. So please go and buy things from Softcat as well. And finally, I wanted to mention our charity partner. So for any of you that don't know, and I would hope lots of people who work within the Bristol and Bath Tech community, you would already know, DigiLocal is our charity partner for this year. So DigiLocal are a not-for-profit whose mission is to help young people from diverse backgrounds get into coding. So they go into, I think it's 16 schools at the moment, and they run coding clubs for all sorts of different people. And they're run on a shoestring by people who really want to make a difference. So we wanted to try and make a difference for them this year, which is why they're our charity partner. So our awesome friends at MoneyHub have set up this QR code. If you scan the QR code, which you'll be able to see at all of our events this week, it will take you to an open banking platform, which will allow you to make a donation to DigiLocal. Please do so. It makes an enormous difference to them. That's pretty much it from me. I'm going to hand over to Annabelle and Adrian. I will be in the background though, lurking. So if anyone has any questions specifically for the festival, please do ask them in chat, and I will be there and I will attempt to answer them. But that's pretty much it from me. So I am going to go over to the right screen and take myself off. So Annabelle, Adrian, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Hope you can all hear me. Welcome to our presentation on location intelligence, using geospatial data and services to transform business operations. I'm Annabelle. I'm a geospatial consultant at Deloitte UK, and my background is mostly in transport and urban planning industries. As Ben was saying, please make sure you put any comments in the chat and we can get back to those at the end and hopefully, answer any questions. Over to you, Adrian.
Thanks, Annabelle. And Adrian Waters, I lead Deloitte UK's geospatial line of effort within our Space Drones and Geospatial Centre of Excellence, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second. My background is 20 plus years in the geospatial and GIS consulting field. I started out, I spent a long time in the military. And kind of over that period of time, it's been a genuinely fascinating journey, I think. But over that period of time, seeing capabilities that 20 years ago belonged to sovereign military being absolutely surpassed and knocked out of the park by the opportunities that are available now within the wider location intelligence and data analytics sphere, which is really the driver behind this presentation. But first of all, Annabelle, can we just flip over to the SDG slide, please? Thanks. So SDG, what is it and why has the firm brought it together? It's a relatively new offering that we've created within Deloitte in the UK to bring together three separate but really very closely related spheres: space, drones and geospatial. A couple of years back, the UK government came out with an ambitious but certainly not unachievable target to make the UK's space industry 10% of the global sector by 2030. And in order to do that, that means transforming from being an end user of other nations' space capabilities to being a really kind of key player from the design and something that we've traditionally done quite well in this country, the design of space vehicles and the exploitation of the data that comes from them, towards creating a sovereign launch capability, and to really make us a major player in that, no pun intended, in that space. And Deloitte supports that in the kind of like the upstream professional consultancy effort, as well as professional consultancy services to some of the products that come out of space. So whether that's space-based communication, whether that's space-based networking, or whether that's kind of Earth observation type data. We have a drone practice where we see in the relatively near future, in the 5 to 10 year point, that inflection point coming from where drones become an interesting and novel and potentially disruptive technology, carrying sensors around and taking Earth observation data are traditionally provided from space and moving that into the really kind of quite granular and detailed level that you can get with a relatively small drone carrying a relatively small sensor. But in 5 to 10 years, we believe that inflection point is coming, where we'll see beyond visual line of sight, where we'll see true autonomy in the drone sector, where we'll move into the ability for drones to transform logistics, for the ability to transform personal transportation. And so we also see in geospatial the analytics layer, the data exploitation layer, that takes those two quite closely related offerings but really binds them together. And that's where we see the downstream, the analytics, the data platforms, the location intelligence opportunities that geospatial creates. And so we take those three offerings: space, drone and geospatial, and that's where we get location intelligence. Thanks, Annabelle. And next slide, please. So what actually is location intelligence? Location intelligence is business intelligence, something I think we're all quite familiar with, but business intelligence using geospatial data. And geospatial data itself is something that's been around for 30 plus years now, at least. And my experience of the industry is that it's never quite reached a tipping point. It's never quite had the potential that people like me, with a background in it, with a specialization in it, have been talking about for years, and never quite understanding why other people didn't get what we do. And there's a saying that I first heard 20 plus years ago, that 80% of data is geospatial data. And for the majority of my career, I've confidently sort of like talked around to senior leadership in organizations, to chief data officers, to chief technology officers, and said, 80% of your data is geospatial. Why aren't you doing more with it? Why aren't you employing more people like me to do more with your data? And the truth is that 80% of data being geospatial doesn't necessarily chime with people. So I spent a little bit of time while Annabelle and I were putting this presentation together to try and understand where that quote comes from, because it's everywhere in the geospatial kind of industry literature, but it's almost a bit of an urban myth. And the first reference we could find to it was in the late 80s. And it was a GIS consultant working in urban planning somewhere in the States that put this thing together that said 80% of the data that I use is geospatial. And that's where that saying really comes from. 80% of geospatial data is geospatial. Well, thanks for that. But actually, in the world we live in today, in the world of data analytics and big data and data-driven organizations, 80% of your data can become geospatial if we're prepared to do something with it. So think about the data holdings that an organization has. Typically, we have information on people, whether that is our customers, or whether that's our staff, or whether that's our potential customers. We have information on those people. And all of those people have one thing in common, which is that at some point in time, those people are somewhere. They live in places, they receive services in places, they go to places, their journeys start and end in a single place. There is a strong location component to those people. We hold information, we hold data on processes, on a manufacturing process, on a business process. Again, those processes take place somewhere. Our supply chains start and end somewhere. Our raw materials come from somewhere. Our manufacturing processes take place in somewhere. And if we can understand the location and the possibilities of that location and the insights that that location information can give us, we can make our data richer and more valuable. The same is true of things. The same is true of our metadata. All of it may have and should have a location component, but very often we need to enrich that data to make it happen, to take an address where someone lives, which frankly is just a string of letters and numbers, to turn that into a location on the Earth's surface. Then we need to enrich our data. So the arguments that we'll kind of talk through in the next 20 to 30 minutes or so is not that 80% of data is geospatial by default. It's that 80% of data may be geospatial if we enrich it. And in order to deliver the amount and the sensible enrichment that that data deserves, we need to have an idea about what we want to do with it and how it suits our organizational aims. If the exploitation of business data is business intelligence, then the exploitation of location is location intelligence. And the two are as fundamental to the operations of an organization in 2021 as any other process that we carry through. And if we want to be a data-driven organization, then we must include location and data within that process. So we've got a kind of a first pass at a case study of what location intelligence is and why it's different to the traditional model of geospatial analytics that we might be familiar with. It is The most talked about subject in the 21st century is sustainability, the climate challenge, and the efforts that globally we need to go through to address that climate challenge. One thing that is fundamentally, and I think very well understood, is that trees are our friends, and that the more trees that we can plant across the planet, the better a chance we have of meeting that climate change goals of 1.5 degrees by 2050. But there's something else as well, and something that is starting to become understood is that it's not just trees, that wetlands themselves, and peat in particular, has a huge potential to address some of the challenges around greenhouse gas and carbon emissions. And that peat in upland, lowland, and wetland peat areas, degraded, drained, overly managed peat is a carbon emitter. But the restored natural peat in its pristine condition is a carbon sink. And so there's a huge kind of onus to manage those peatlands and those wetlands and those wilderness areas properly in order that they can act as a climate sink. The traditional kind of approach to that is through Earth observation. And because Earth observation data, the kind of processing that's done of it is done by people like me, frankly, that have worked within the GIS industry for 20 plus years, we've always seen the output of it as something that looks like a map that says, here's pristine, restored peat acting as a carbon sink. Here's degraded, overly managed peat acting as a carbon emitter. We've put it on a map. Isn't that fantastic? Well, to the landowners, the people who are trying to seek to maximize the value of their land holdings, no, that's not really good enough at all. And so the location intelligence process starts to then look slightly different. Thinking about the business problems of a large landowner in this country, the UK government, the Church of England are a huge landowner. These large tracts of upland peat, tens of thousands of hectares held by single landowners. What those landowners, I would argue, need to understand, what their KPIs are, is what is the condition of my peat land holdings? What's the change since last year? The location intelligence process is not about producing a colourful map. It's about producing the numbers that go into their business information year on year, month on month. And so we start in this example, the image in the top left, satellite imagery. In this case, the Sentinel constellation is managed by the European Space Agency. And we're imaging in not just the visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum, but we're imaging in the infrared part as well. And it's that infrared part that becomes quite important, because once we get into the infrared part of the electromagnetic spectrum, then we can tell the difference between degraded peat, natural peat. We can go through, we can classify what's acting as a carbon sink, what's acting as a carbon emitter. And importantly, we can count the volumes. And so a landowner that owns 20,000 hectares of upland peat somewhere in the UK doesn't necessarily need to know pixel by pixel or square kilometre by square kilometre what condition that peatland is in. He needs to know across his whole land ownings, what's the volume in condition 1? What's the volume in condition 2? What's the change since last year? Are things improving or are things decreasing? And those business intelligence type KPIs, that management information, is location intelligence. And there's not a single map involved. The output of it is numbers which go into the dashboards which drive our businesses. There are a number of pillars, though, that we need to produce to get to this point. The path to location intelligence. And actually, if we look at those pillars, then we'll see those as as being the path to a data-driven organization. location intelligence and having that capability is no different to being any other kind of data-driven organization. It's about our policies, it's about our people, it's about how we handle on and acquire, process, and share our data. And so for the next 15 minutes or so, we're just going to talk through, Annabelle and I, about what the people, what the processes, and what the technologies should look like to put in place to enable us to become a location intelligence or location data driven organization. But just before I hand you back to Annabelle, just a reminder, please, in terms of a quick bit of housekeeping, that if there are any questions on anything we've discussed so far, please just post it in the comments and then we'll get towards at the end.
Thanks, Adrian. So yeah, as Adrian just mentioned, one of the core pillars to becoming a location-driven organization is understanding the benefit that location intelligence can bring to different people depending on where they sit within an organization. And the key roles is obviously your traditional GIS specialist, and they would generally be the manager of the data or of the geospatial knowledge infrastructures. And then typically you've also got your data scientist who deals with data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, business intelligence, and they would be able to take this new sort of geospatial knowledge and incorporate that into their existing operating models. So massively increasing their offering value and the value of their outputs. But this only really happens when you've got the sort of leaders and managers with a vision to bring about sort of efficient change, as well as the ability to source the right talent to make this happen. But then, finally, ultimately the key beneficiary of location intelligence is your customer, your sort of unconscious user who doesn't really care about how it comes about or how they receive the service. They just want the best experience of their product or service. So yeah, the point we're really making here is that investing in geospatial infrastructure to develop these sort of processes and techniques that we've discussed will ultimately mostly benefit the end user. Over to Adrian.
Fab, thanks, Annabelle. So from a process perspective, if the people that we need to recruit are not new or different, they're not the traditional GIS analyst, and I fully include myself in this. It's kind of rather sweeping generalization, but the GIS guy that sits in the corner making maps and not really mixing well with others, that the people we need to recruit are the data scientists. They're the operators of the 2020s, not someone special, not someone new. It's about putting in place the processes and the technology to enable those people. And so from a process perspective, we need to think about, as a business, what are our values? What are the purposes of our data strategy, let alone our location intelligence strategy? So how can we align the two to deliver our organizational goals from our data strategy? That as the volumes of data that are available to our people and to our data science teams change and increase exponentially year on year, how do we automate and how do we operate at scale with those volumes of data? And so the old model of what's the best thing, what's the best piece of software and the best tech stack on the market now is no longer the answer to the question. The answer to the question is, where will we be in 5 years? And therefore, what do we expect our volumes of data and to do, and what levels of scalability do we need to put in place? Making our data open and easily accessible to our people. And so it's no longer the GIS team sitting in the corner are the only people that can access and do things with location data. It's across the organization. And whether that's through role-based access control or whether that is just about democratization of our data, but it's making it available to everybody in an organization who may benefit from that location data, from the outputs of our location intelligence processes, or may be able to apply it to their challenges to improve the outputs of their role within the business. And if we can do that, then we can develop actionable insights. And that ultimately is the goal of, I think, any business intelligence process, is about putting information or turning information into insights and putting them in front of our decision makers to be acted upon. In order to do that, though, there's one more thing that I think we just need to talk about, which is the technology platforms that underpin this. This diagram, deliberately, when we put this together, we tried to stay away from any particular specific infrastructure. This kind of diagrammatical representation of an enterprise data platform and the components that go to make it up, it's deliberately agnostic. But as enterprises and as businesses and as organizations move towards this kind of large open data architecture to enable as many people within the business as possible to operate and to contribute to the business intelligence process, the layers here, the components of those data platforms are common to all, I would suggest, whether that's through the back end, the platform operations functions, whether it's through the analytics hub, enabling our data scientists to produce some really cool data visualizations to drive those business insights, whether it's the API layer, hoovering up vast volumes of openly available data and pushing it back out to our decision makers. The component parts of this are kind of common to all. The data itself, the old days of kind of really specific, geospatial specific file transfer protocols and file formats that only certain pieces of software are gone. It's about open, machine readable formats for those large volumes of data. We need to consider, though, data loss and data privacy, but we have that as part of our organizational data policy anyway. There's nothing new or separate required to deliver location intelligence. Going back to talking about the business processes, then actionable insights are based on our user needs. And by understanding our user needs, we can put in place the business and the location intelligence processes and technologies that we need. Open standards enable that large scale volume and analysis of transfer, and open standards that are available and accessible to all the data handling functions within our organization. And then lastly, that innovative and leading, enabling, putting in place the technology blocks that enable our people to be innovative and to develop and to deliver new insights and new actionable information constantly. That it's about putting in place change, not delivering the best solution for October 2021, but remembering that this will have to serve to 2026 and beyond. All of those components, though, and again, I would argue that all of those components are not special and unique to location intelligence, that this is a data-driven organization that is location enabled. It's not something extra. It's not an extra cost to our business. It's making use of the components that we already have as a data-driven organization to deliver more. By enriching our data, by enabling our people, we deliver more to location intelligence. And so the last kind of vision, the last 5 minutes is what could a location intelligence, or what kind of questions could location intelligence answer as we go forward from here? Annabelle.
So yeah, I'm just going to run through a sort of example of where these sort of core pillars have been brought together successfully as an example. So obviously, advancements in technological developments, as well as the energy revolution and a requirement for cities to become carbon neutral, have created a host of sort of new challenges for leaders. And so a key example of this is the requirement of transforming our revenue collection for transport. So obviously, as vehicles are switching from being gas fueled to electric, revenues from the gas tax are declining at an expected rate of 1 to 2% a year. So now governments across the globe are looking for an alternative way to fund roadway maintenance. So through the creation of sort of location-driven reporting, distance or mileage-based user fees have been gaining sort of political traction as a likely solution. So this is where a fee is assigned regardless of the vehicle's energy source or the fuel consumed. And this has been happening in Minnesota, where the Department of Transport there has completed a recent trial experiment, really, where they've been using existing GPS infrastructure already in place in our cars and smartphones. So in order to bypass the need for creating these, expensive new infrastructure systems, and yeah, they've successfully completed that trial, where they sort of had an IoT data device sort of underpinning the central data platform, and it produced this location-driven reporting, and the results produced are really powerful in helping solve other challenges as well. It could give us insight into how or where building charging points should be located, understanding the impact of autonomy, and obviously there is the impact, the issue of personal data here. But as Adrian mentioned, that we already deal with this already. So policy may need to be developed around that, but ultimately any business intelligence is understanding what's happening to incite some kind of change. And it's not about defining policy, it's about creating information from which policy can be evolved. So yeah, I think what time? Yeah, I think we're nearly finished with our presentation. I'll have a little look at the questions. Right, so Adrian, I've got a couple of questions coming up. Should universities be training geographers or data scientists, or should geospatial data science be the go-to degree? That's from Alistair Graham.
That's a really great question, Alistair, and I've just spent the last kind of couple of minutes trying to wrangle it in both ways. I guess the point is that they're not mutually exclusive. That geographers need to be data scientists, and data scientists need to have a knowledge of geography. And my experience has been that across the last kind of 20 years, and I won't say this about geographers, but I'll say this about the GIS industry, is that for the last 20 years or so, we've made ourselves a little bit too exclusive, I believe. That we've said that without a deep and fundamental understanding of GIS and spatial data types and geography, that no one else should really kind of get to play with our toys. That I don't think has served us as a profession particularly well. And so data scientists with access to that location data delivers innovation, and it delivers insights, and it delivers integration with the rest of the kind of the organizational data process. That said, the deep knowledge and the difficult questions do take the geography background. And so geographers do need to have an understanding of the data science profession. And I think that is a move away from the slightly more traditional well, we've got GIS and this is what we do, to a move towards understanding what a data scientist notebook looks like, to being that the future is probably Python and R rather than the monolithic buttonology in a desktop GIS of any breed would be my answer. So the geospatial data science as a degree, yeah, why not? I don't think we're going to change the. I don't think we're going to change the profession, or I don't think we're going to change the educational sector either. But I do probably think that the data handling side of the geographical profession probably belongs with the data science profession than where it is at the moment.
We've had another question from Daniel. Have you seen any good applications of geospatial data in field sales?
Yes, I have, Daniel, and I need to be very careful that about being on brand here. But the firm has a couple of products in this space, and I'm not going to plug them. But yes, fundamentally, it's and it becomes a challenge of blending and analyzing what are probably non-traditional GIS data sets. And so whether that's about footfall on the high street, or whether that is about spend that comes from organizations like Visa or MasterCard, and whether that then becomes the kind of the openly available data about where businesses are. But taking those three quite separate data sources, and there may be a level of enrichment to add the location component to them, because we understand that, you know, a sale takes place somewhere, but we may have to add that as essentially an extra field so that we understand where the location is. If we take that and we take those three types and blend them together, then we can understand not just where sales are, or not just where our potential markets are, but where are the gaps in the market. And so, you know, whether that's establishing the best location for a new pizza joint in town, or whether that's establishing where our competitors just either have a stranglehold or don't have the presence. But yes, there are some stunningly good applications in that. But I'm just kind of conscious that if I was to talk about Deloitte Location Edge too heavily, then it may seem like I was giving a slightly biased answer. Happy to pick that up on a separate conversation, though. I believe our contact details are coming.
Yeah, so I think that's it for questions for now. But if anyone's got any other questions, please put them in the comments, or, you know, we can always get back to you at a later date. Our comments are, sorry, our contact details are here. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to either of us. And yeah, thanks very much for joining. I believe the slides and a recording of the presentation will be made available to you all. Oh, we've had another question come through. Is there a reluctance to adopt geospatial location intelligence in the business sector, as seen in the construction industry right now?
I've certainly seen a reluctance, Elliot. Yes. I think there are certain sectors that have been early and traditional adopters of GIS, and there's almost I would possibly suggest that when you say the construction industry, I think the large scale kind of infrastructure construction have been traditional users of GIS. But more widely than that, and I'll go back to my central, or I'll go back to the central theme of the argument, if I may, which is that the geospatial industry, having traditionally made itself a little bit special, has put up a barrier to adoption, whether that's about extra cost or whether that's about extra headcount. That's been the barriers to kind of wider adoption. And so if location intelligence is about saying, well, you have a data strategy, of course it should include location. And hopefully that is the kind of path to wider adoption.
Great, thanks, Adrian. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I think I'll hand back over to Ben.
Awesome. Adrian, Annabelle, thank you so much for that. It was really interesting. It's a while since I've heard anything on that subject, so it was great to sort of get an update, and particularly focused around sustainability and the impacts that it can have in that area. So thank you very much. As Annabelle mentioned, we'll be sending out a copy of the recording and the slides, and I'm sure Adrian and Annabelle would be more than happy to have a chat with people if they would like to. Obviously, their details are currently on the screen, but their details will also be in the recording that we send out in probably a week or so. So thank you very much to both of you for that. For all of our audience, please do check out bristoltechfest.org for all the other events that are in this week. There's a whole range of different things, both in person and virtually, that you can sign up for, and pretty much everything is free. So do check it out. And I think that's pretty much it from us today. So thank you very much.